Welcome back to another monthly conversation. I am joined here with your one and only Scott Young. This is Zorica, his lovely wife. I know you usually do the introduction, but I'm taking over.
Taking over today.
I'm the one interviewing you. So
okay.
This month we're talking about sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So to be honest, sleep was not the obvious one for me when we were first talking about all the different foundations.
Yeah.
Like when I think about sleep, that's just something that we all do. But I think for many people, it's a big struggle to get a good night's sleep. And I think oftentimes we don't really know why we are tired or why we don't get good night's sleep. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I think is important for all of us to put into our daily practice and our daily routine. So my first question is, why do we sleep? Why is it even necessary for our existence?
Well, I mean, sleep is one of these things where researchers have done a lot of work on like what happens when you sleep, but it's one of the ones where the like function of sleep, at least like the primary function, like this is the ultimate reason for why we sleep, is still at least somewhat mysterious. So if in like the textbooks, the academic books, they're sort of like, well, people are still like arguing about why exactly we sleep, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because if you think about like we did a whole episode, we were talking about like food and nutrition, and there's like a lot of controversy there of like what's the best diet, and like, I mean, you can go online and see a lot of this controversy, but no one has any doubt about why we eat food. Like we use it to get energy and to build our bodies. Like it's very obvious. Whereas sleep is this activity that basically all animals do that takes up about a third of our lifetimes. And if you think about it, it's very puzzling why animals would sleep at all. I mean, we just kind of take for granted that they do. But if you think about it, sleeping has this like enormous evolutionary cost. Like you're unconscious, immobilized for some large chunk of the day. That means that like predators can come get you. Like you have to do all these rituals to make sure you're safe and this kind of thing. So even, in our modern environment where you can be like snugly tucked away in your home, in your bed, this kind of thing, we don't think about that. Like just the idea that, if you were out living in the grasslands 100,000 years ago, going to sleep at night would have been a kind of dangerous time. So it must do something extremely important. But it's also not entirely clear like what it is. The thing is that sleep is involved in many, many different things. So it's involved in a lot of neurological processes. So it's involved in sort of removing waste products from the brain. There's some evidence that if you use a part of your brain more during the daytime, then that part of the brain, if they do these little EEG where they put all these electrodes on your head, they will measure more slow wave sleep in that part of the brain. So I think one of the studies, people were practicing something with like their left hand, and the like part of their brain that represents the left hand was like getting kind of more deep sleep than the other parts. So it must do something neurologically, but even really simple animals sleep too. So it can't be the whole story. So there's lots of different things that sleep does. And so we know it's super important, but I think the way that I kind of took from the research is that it's almost like the Swiss Army knife of physiological functions, that it's something that does a lot of different things, because evolution was like, okay, if you're going to have this 8 hours of downtime during the day, I'm going to do all this housekeeping that I have to do. I'm going to consolidate that all to this phase. So if you don't sleep, your immune system suffers, your brain functions, cognition suffers. And if you don't sleep for long enough, then you die. So it's super important.
Yeah. And then you mentioned something about the modern versus traditional way of sleeping. What are the differences of how we sleep today than how it was like back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, this is also something that like it seems obvious once you think about it for a moment, but the way we sleep and the way we kind of like have our daily rhythms are extremely weird, like compared to ancestral humans. And the reason why is that we have something called indoor lighting. Right. So for most of human history, once it got like extremely dark, I mean, you could have a fire and like for, people had like candles and stuff. But if you've ever been in a room that just has a bit of candlelight, it's not bright enough to do a whole lot of things. And so for most of human history, when it was dark, people just went to sleep, right? And so there's so many factors about modern sleep, which are just from anthropological work, historical work, we can tell are quite unusual. So one of them is the idea that people sleep 8 hours in one straight shot through the night. At least some researchers have proposed that this is unusual. This is not like the typical way that we sleep, that a more common mode of sleeping was to go to sleep kind of after sundown. You sleep for a few hours and then you kind of get up for like an hour or two in the middle of the night. Maybe you're chatting, maybe you're doing some other things with your sleeping partners. And then you go back to sleep for another few hours before dawn. So this was like a more common kind of pattern. Other things are like the idea that you sleep in your own room, sort of isolated from everyone. Like almost nobody did that. Especially, as parents, this is something because, when you have kids, it's very difficult to get them to sleep in their own room. And it's pretty clear that part of the reason for that is that that's extremely unnatural, that like children, especially infants or really young children, virtually always slept right next to their parents in all of human history. And so, training your child not to do that is in some ways very hard because you're getting them to do something that's very unnatural for them. Yeah. And also it was noisy and bustling. You were outside, the fire's crackling. Some people are awake and talking and, you're not sleeping in this nice feather bed. You're, maybe lying down on the ground if you're, a hunter-gatherer tribes person, or maybe if you're some sort of medieval peasant, you're living in some straw bed that's infested in fleas. So in some ways, the way we sleep in modern days is just better in some ways, but also super weird by this kind of historical standard.
Yeah. And do you believe in that, like, there is people that are kind of like night owls that prefer to be up at night and then sleep during the day? Like I've always been an early riser. Like I am a morning person. I like to go to bed early, and that's how I always remember myself to be. But I know that some people don't really function like that. Like they like to stay up late, or some people have night shifts, like they work. So how does that work with the system of the body and the brain? Like does that go back in history, or is it?
So there seems to be a strong a biological basis for your chronotype, which is sort of the fancy term for whether you're an early riser or a night owl. And people have different chronotypes, and it seems to be at least partly a function of your genes. So now, obviously, if you have to start getting up early, you start making yourself go to sleep earlier, you start waking up earlier, you can adapt to a different sleep schedule to some extent. But some people find that much easier and harder. So the kind of absent social pressures, do you naturally stay up till 2 a.m, or do you wake up at 5? That's something that's probably to a great deal biological, but it's also dependent on your life stage too. So the sleep that you need and when your clock is depends a lot on how old you are. So obviously we know that babies and young children require more sleep, but even adolescents require more sleep than adults do. And one of the features is that when you get into your teenage years, your clock shifts much later. So all the parents who have teenagers who they cannot get out of bed before noon on the weekends and who stay up just sort of till 2, 3 in the morning without trying to, don't blame that on laziness or social media or this kind of thing. That is a biological reality. And on the converse, as you get older and older, not only does your amount of sleep tend to decline, but you get earlier and earlier. So this explains again, the seniors dinner happening at 4 p.m. because everyone's passing out around 8 and waking up at 4 a.m. I mean, it's a stereotype, but it's grounded in this basic reality. As we age, we become more and more early risers, and there's a good reason for that. So the kind of evolutionary argument for why we have this diversity of chronotypes is you can imagine, again, going back to this idea that sleep is this potentially very dangerous time, right? This is this time where you're highly vulnerable to predators and enemies and this kind of thing. And so you would kind of want, in the tribe sitting around the fireplace to have a few people chatting up late and then a few people waking up super early. So the chance that like everyone is just out sleeping and defenseless for 8 hours, that window has shrunk considerably. Like that makes sense. And
So
I
was
think
it the teenagers that are just staying up till
they're
watching
they're
over, the grandparents?
they got leopard duty. So yeah. So that's the consequence of that. But I mean, there's important social implications because, the adults have to work and there's a lot of pressure on like making the teens conform to our biological rhythm. You have lots of schools that like start school at like 8 a.m. And this has like well-documented effects of being really bad for students' learning outcomes.
Oh gosh,
So I mean, if we wanted high schoolers to have much better educational outcomes, we would shift the school day later. So it would be like 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. instead of when it normally is. So it does have real consequences, this chronological shift.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. I did water polo when I was in high school. So I woke up at 5 in the morning, twice a week. For 6 o'clock practice.
Yeah.
And I remember like when by the time I would get to school in the morning, I would just be exhausted.
Yeah.
I felt very sleep deprived. And those days especially, I had a really hard time focusing in my class.
Yeah. And it's doubly bad because sleep is so intricately associated with learning. So if you are regularly missing out on sleep, which many teens are doing, it's impacting this memory consolidation process, like all the things that require learning, memory, skills, this kind of stuff depend on sleep for, their effective learning. So if you are, it's kind of ironic that in a lot of our sort of most competitive academic pursuits, there's this sort of concomitant sleep deprivation that goes with it. Like you imagine like the medical student staying up for 30 hours, like it's extremely inefficient for learning. So it's just unfortunate that a lot of our like social systems have been set up in this way that like, okay, well, we're just going to have a lot of caffeine and pull all these all-nighters because it's terrible for efficiency in terms of forming new memories and skills.
Yeah. Yeah, and then to move on to being new parents as well, that also comes with its own challenges. I remember us going to like a baby class. Like the, what do you call those?
Yeah, like the baby, like preparing you for becoming parents class. Yeah.
And one thing that the nurse said is that the moms actually, when the baby is born, they are ready to be up all night without it really affecting them. Like they're just supposed to just wake up every 2 hours and feed and then go back to bed. Whereas sometimes for the dad can be even more difficult because they're not like they weren't pregnant, so nothing really prepares
no hormone
them.
Changes,
There's no hormone changes. And I think even today, and you mentioned something, you read a book where the author talks about the parent sleep industrial sleeping complex.
Yeah.
And I remember being in that trap of like, even while I was pregnant, I was researching all these different bassinets and noise machines and all these different things of like how to train the baby to sleep throughout the night. It's an obsession really because you value your sleep so much. You still have all these different chores to do around the house and work and things like that, and you're not sleeping, and it can really be so like I remember I felt like a different person for months when both of the babies were born because I was not sleeping.
Well, and the second one is even harder because when you have the first one, like the baby doesn't sleep on this sort of, 16 hours, 8 hour schedule, but they are sleeping for a large portion of the time. So it is possible to like have these little interspersed naps, at least if you're not working at the time during the day. But when you have a second child, then you still have to take care of the other one. And so they're also awake. So I remember, the shift to when Thomas, our oldest, was born, there was that like period of, difficulty sleeping, but it was like nothing compared to when the second one was born. And then it was sort of like, well, yeah, but you still have to be a parent and on the whole time. And I think for all the new parents out there, like it does get better, but definitely, I would put, having a new baby is like sort of maybe the top extremes for like, that with like maybe medical residency and like some of these other like feats of sleep deprivation is definitely one of the ones that one of the more extreme ones that you go through in your life.
Yeah. But do you think that all these new technologies help us sleep, or do you think they make it worse?
You mean with kids stuff or just in
Well,
general?
just in general.
Yeah. I don't know. So it was interesting. You mentioned the book that that you were referencing there is Wild Nights by Benjamin Reese. And this is also the book that talks about kind of like sleeping in history and just sort of how weird it is right now, and really how much diversity there is in sleep. Not just like there was one way of sleeping and we're not doing it, but just there's this enormous range of, like the Inuit up north would have these like extremely lopsided, like up for 22 hours in the summer and like sleeping most of the day in the winter kind of extremes, just because of the length of the days being so extreme in the northern latitudes, and other examples of this. And he talks about how, we've created this sort of industry around sleep and getting sleep, particularly with parents, because they often struggle with this, without maybe often realizing that, like, well, some of our difficulties are self-imposed because, you want the baby to sleep in their own room without, being able to self-soothe and this kind of stuff. Not because that's sort of natural, but just because you want to have maybe an hour or two in an indoor lit room, doing something on your own without taking care of the child. So I think the like whole children bedtime routine thing, you can imagine an earlier time period where like once it's dark, everyone just kind of gets ready for bed because like there's nothing to do anymore. But we have Netflix now, so you want to have a chance to watch Succession or White Lotus or whatever it is before you go to bed. You don't want it to just be like, okay, kids are asleep now, I'm going to go to sleep too. So there is a lot of situations where, because we have some technologies, we're now creating different technologies to compensate for the earlier technologies that we have with respect to our sleep.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, as parents, we definitely do that as well. We have a routine for our kids, and I don't know if it's more for them or for us, but I just think it works.
Yeah.
Like, it works for us to have, and we kind of feel it out. We have an idea of when it is before the really tired tantrums start to happen. Like, okay, everybody is still jumping around, happy, in a good mood. Everyone has had their dinner, and we start the routine, and we do, bath and brushing teeth and story time. Like, it's a long routine, but I think we've done a really good job, and I think it sets them up for a good night rest. And I think they're also older now. They're 2 and 5. I've jumped a year. 2 and 5. So I think they're both older, and they're better at like just sleeping throughout the night. But I think it's kind of become necessary, right? Yeah.
I think part of this observation is not really, like, it's more just an observation. It's not really advice. And I think everyone, especially when you're a parent, you need to figure out what works for you. Like, it's easy to say, okay, well, this is what they did, in Tanzania, 100,000 years ago, or what they did, in medieval England or something. That's not necessarily like, oh, this is prescription. Like, if you're not doing this, you're some kind of weird, unnatural parent. Yeah. And I know, anything regarding child rearing just has these like extremely fierce defenders of some philosophy. So you have all the people who are like ferberizing, or you go like, let the kid cry it out. You have to maintain this sort of clock-like routine, and that's the key to domestic bliss. And then there's the other, natural parents who are like, you can never enforce anything or never do anything. I think really you got to figure out what works for you as a parent. And I do think one of the major takeaways maybe from all of this is that there are lots of different ways that people have slept in the past. And that was maybe one of my takeaways from doing the reading for the month, is that kind of maybe our problems with sleep are also due to like excessive fussiness about it. Like that we're just a little bit too persnickety about like, well, things have to be just like this or you're not going to do it properly. So while I think we all need to give sleep its proper respect and prioritize it enough so that we are well rested in our everyday lives, I think this kind of, where you have this listicle where it's like 40 things that you have to do with sleep, and it's like have the blackout blinds and the eye patch and the lavender scent and the perfect soft music. If they help you, that's great. But if it becomes this kind of if you're not doing this, you're sleeping wrong, then I think this is just missing the fact that like basically no one has ever slept this way in all of human history, and somehow we, muddled through it.
Yeah. My parents were quite young when I was little, so I remember many times when they would have friends over and I would just be sleeping kind of in the corner. I was with my dad the other day, and even he was like, because we are very routine-like as parents, and he was like, you should just let your kid decide when he wants to go to sleep. And I'm like, I can't do that.
Yeah, Meets goes on team natural parenting.
He's very much is, but I think he also remembers probably how I was when I was young. And no, I probably didn't have any crazy tantrums or not,
maybe
having the exact same routine every day. I don't really think it affected me negatively. I think I very much adapted and just kind of went along with the flow. And I don't know. I mean, I was looked after by my grandparents quite a bit. We had a big family, and sometimes I would go over at their house, and it's also very interesting because I think sleep is also very different culturally. And that was the next thing I want to talk about like naps and taking naps, because in Macedonia summers are quite long, and I remember a lot of people would stay up late at night, especially during the summer, because that's like the only time it's like, oh, it's finally like cool and I can go for a walk. But a lot of people would take a nap after work. Like I remember my grandpa was a doctor, and he would usually work like 7 to 3 in the hospital or something like that, and I would come back home with him, and we would just nap, and then after that we would stay up and eat. Like some cultures eat later in the night, like in Spain you were saying people eat dinner.
Everyone's on the siesta
later.
schedule.
And so culturally, do you think some people are better off with their sleep because they live sort of this like they take naps and they have better sleep because of that?
Well, I mean, I think again this is just part to illustrate the enormous sort of diversity there is in like kind of sleep patterns. So I don't know whether there's any like, well, the siesta biphasic sleep is better than like what we do here. I do think there is probably some built-in tendency to nap in the afternoon. Like there's a well-documented what's called like the postprandial dip, which is this sleepiness you feel kind of after lunchtime. And although some of that can be related to like eating a heavy meal at lunch, it will still happen even if you don't eat like a huge meal at that time period. So it's not purely just eating a lot. So this suggests there's maybe something natural about having afternoon naps. To me, I feel like it's less of a everyone needs to be napping. Again, I like this kind of like do what works for you sort of takeaway from this, rather than there's this like one way to do it, and if you're not doing it that way, you're doing it wrong. But the idea that it would be nicer if in at least like North American, maybe also Northern European, where this kind of approach to sleeping is not as historically common, if there was like more acceptance of napping. I was just thinking about it here because I used to take naps all the time. Like when I was doing the MIT challenge, I had like, sometimes I would take like 2 20-minute naps in the day, and they would like work so well. You just like, you feel your brain slowing down, you take a 20-minute nap. It's like having a shot of caffeine, except you don't have to put any drugs in your system. And now like we work in a little office space, it's like kind of difficult to find a place to like actually nap and lie down. Sometimes I manage to squeeze one in, but it's more difficult. And I miss it sometimes. And I think about, there's this real cultural prescription that like if you're taking naps during the day, it's a sign of laziness. It's like, what were you, you were staying up too late last night. Like, what were you doing? Like, you shouldn't need that kind of thing. And so I definitely have, growing up in this culture, this kind of like, ooh, like, maybe I should, in a way that I would never feel about having another cup of coffee at like 3 p.m. Like if I had another cup of coffee at 3 p.m., it's like, that's fine. But taking a nap at 3 p.m. is like just too indulgent. And I think that's kind of, that is just a choice that we've made as a culture to view it that way. Someone was telling me, and maybe the people from Japan can weigh in on whether this is true, but that sleeping, taking a nap at work in Japan has totally the opposite connotation that it has here. So here, if I was just walking around like a big office and there was just someone, lying down, sleeping at their cubicle, it would be almost like, get up, it's you're still on the clock, you're supposed to be working. Whereas in Japan, apparently this is like, oh, they're working so hard that they've like passed out at their desk. And so it's sort of like, oh, that's so great, they're just like, they're working through it and they just fell asleep. I mean, I don't want to say that everything is great about the kind of Japanese salaryman work culture, but I just think that's so funny that like the exact same behavior in a different cultural context is like, isn't this productive? Like, isn't this someone showing extreme dedication rather than get up, lazy bones, it's time to work,
No, I don't think people would do that here, but I think you just wouldn't see it.
Yeah, you wouldn't nap because it's so frowned upon.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever...
Yeah.
All the years I've worked in an office, I don't think I've ever seen somebody just napping.
Yeah, you wouldn't dare to just like go to, like, especially if, you didn't, I know there's some like now I think some of the tech companies have like napping pods. Like there are some kind of progressive,
we had napping rooms in university.
Well, but you're a student. You're kind of like, you're autonomous in a way that like no one's, paying you for your time kind of thing, right? I just think that like the traditional work culture is very discouraging of naps in general. And one of the best books it's not really a book, it's more of a lecture series that I read, listened to during this month was Jade Wu has a sort of Audible only kind of course called, I think it's called The Underappreciated Power of Naps. And she like goes through all this research that like, napping, especially if you can do it in a way that it doesn't affect your nighttime sleep, is just like this enormous cognitive enhancer. Like it improves your memory, it improves your mood, it improves athletic performance. So I think it is an underrated tool, especially since our default tends to be caffeine, which I think maybe has more negative consequences.
Yeah, well, I think you're a great napper. I've always been really jealous of how you're able to nap, and only for like 20, 30 minutes. Yeah,
I can do a 10-minute nap.
I am one of those nappers that when I fall asleep, I take like a 2 or 3 hour nap, and then I wake up and I don't even know what day it is. Yeah. I don't know where I am, like what's going on. And so I try not to nap because of that, because once I start napping, I'm really bad at it.
So that was one of the pieces of advice that Wu gives in this lecture series, is that part of the issue is that sleep is not just this one undifferentiated period of unconsciousness. There's all these different phases that your brain goes through. And one of the most important phases is called slow wave sleep, or like deep sleep. And this is something that you kind of gradually enter into. It is probably one of the more important ones for like why we actually sleep, because if you have sleep deprivation, this is the phase that your brain catches up on first. But it is associated with like when you're in this this deep sleep, this slow wave sleep, you are like least rousable. Like it's the hardest to wake you up from that phase. And if you do get woken up from it, you have the most like grogginess and sleep inertia, because it's probably the part of the phase where like your brain is kind of doing the most heavy duty like housekeeping work. And so if you keep the naps under 30 minutes, it's less likely that you're going to enter that phase. Now, I tend to be someone where like I can easily just sort of naturally wake up after 20 minutes. But if you are not one of these people and you want to like take advantage of napping, then you got to have the alarm clock to like, okay, it's 20 minutes. And then hitting the snooze button, like you just got to get up after that. So I think that's probably important.
I find for me, what it works is just not even sleeping, just kind of resting my eyes and just it's still kind of thinking about things, but very lightly and just relaxing, and then keep going with my day after. Yeah. So, yeah. Another thing I wanted to talk about is you mentioned insomnia. I think a lot of people struggle with it, and they talk about, not being able to sleep. I've never really had that problem. Yeah. Usually when I go to bed at night, I fall asleep within like 5-10 minutes.
Luckily, me too, yeah.
Yeah, but I know a lot of people struggle with that. So what is the definition, and how would somebody go about with helping themselves fix it?
Yeah, so again, if you feel like you really want to sleep better, you invest a lot of effort into sleeping better, but you just can't sleep, or you can't seem to sleep consistently or well, then this is sort of insomnia. I mean, there's probably like some cutoff definition based on like sleep efficiency or this kind of thing. But I think I would generally distinguish sort of two different cases. So like there's the people who don't sleep well because they don't prioritize it. So, they're just watching one more episode of the show late at night, or they're on their phone and they're like, yeah, I could sleep, but this is me time. I want to like do this. And so there's those people. And I mean, I've definitely been that person at times. And then there's people who you're not sleeping well, even though like it is important to you and you're really trying to make it happen.
You're in your bed. It's dark. You've done everything.
You do everything right, and you still can't sleep well. Yeah. And so the kind of gold standard treatment for insomnia is called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. This is rated much more highly than, let's say, sleeping pills, which is sort of, I would say, the most common solution people have. And sleeping pills are one of those things that, they can work, and they are even something that, is, I don't want to say recommended, but it is used in sort of periods of acute insomnia. So, if you're recently, lost a loved one, or you're dealing with something extremely stressful and you can't sleep because of that, then sometimes they'll prescribe you sleeping pills, but they're not really intended for like long-term use. They have sort of kind of scary negative long-term side effects. And they also tend to interfere with some of the processes that are involved in sleep. So even though you're unconscious, you're not necessarily getting the same restful benefit of like natural sleep. And so cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is the sort of gold standard for like dealing with these issues. And this kind of goes to the point that I was making before about like realizing through the reading that like we're overly fussy, that sleeping better when you have insomnia has this paradoxical quality that like part of the reason it's hard is because you're trying too hard. So sleep is never something you can force yourself to do. You can at most just lie down in your bed and then sleep will just happen to you. It's not something you can like turn on. So it's not like exercising or eating right, that like the more effort you put into it, the more likely it's going to happen. And so this can create this sort of feedback loop where you don't sleep well, so you get anxious about it. And when you're lying down, you start to like ruminate of like, oh, I'm not going to sleep tonight. I'm going to be so tired tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. And like that itself raises your level of general arousal and makes it harder for you to fall asleep. So I highly recommend, if anyone's having issues with this, is another book by Jade Wu is Hello Sleep. I thought was a fantastic overview of CBTI, and also kind of like a step by step, this is what you would have to do if you're not able to get an actual sleep therapist to help you with coaching with this. But one of the central ideas is called sleep consolidation. So this is this idea that, okay, figure out how much you sleep. So if you only sleep, let's say 5 hours a night, that's what you work on, then your new goal would be to sleep in a window of, let's say, 5.5 hours. I think it's usually half an hour more than you're actually sleeping per night. So, now you're only allowed to be in bed, lying down between midnight and 5:30 in the morning. And it's very difficult to switch to that. But part of the idea of this sleep consolidation, which works really well, is that people who have insomnia often have poor sleep, and they often have inconsistent sleep, but they're not actually sleep deprived. That if you're sleep deprived and you lie down, you will fall asleep. That what's happening is that your schedule's bad. You're not like, sometimes you sleep 8 hours, sometimes you sleep 4 hours, sometimes you fall asleep in the middle of the day when you don't want to. You don't even realize you're falling asleep. That's another thing, like insomniacs often don't even realize they've fallen asleep for half an hour and then they wake up. So the idea here is that to like get you onto a more normal sleep rhythm is to compress all of that sleep. Don't allow yourself to sleep outside of that time period.
Just don't even go in the room. Just be in your kitchen, your living room, whatever, doing other things or working, whatever you're doing for the rest of the time, and only in that window, window. And hopefully the idea is that you're so sleepy that you're for sure gonna fall asleep.
Well, that's the idea, is that by so there's two processes involved in making you want to sleep. So one of these is a process that sort of builds throughout the day. So there is a kind of like Jade Wu calls this like a bank account for sleep, that you're slowly accumulating as you stay awake longer. Exercise sort of adds to the bank account. So, and when you do these things, it increases your mental bank account for like how much you need to sleep. And when it's full, you can get a good night's sleep. And so part of the problem is that if you sort of spend the money before it gets full, you don't get a full night's sleep. So that's one of the issues. And so by forcing the sleep consolidation, you're ensuring that you're very sleepy by the time you actually have to go lie down. And so it becomes easier to fall asleep. Now, this isn't the only practice in CBTI. Some of it's involving mindfulness, dealing with some of this sort of arousal. Another big strategy is that, one of the big things they suggest is like, don't do things other than sleeping in your bed, because that causes this kind of Pavlovian, dog salivates when it hears the bell. It's sort of like if you watch TV and read your book and answer emails in your bed, then being in your bed is not strongly associated with you sleeping. And she says one of the worst things you can do if you're an insomniac is try to sleep in your bed and not actually sleep, because then you're associating it with this kind of effortful, anxiety, ruminating approach. So if you're lying down and it's like more than 20 minutes and you're not able to sleep, like get up, go do something. Don't just sit there. Even if you should be sleeping right now, even if it's 3 a.m, like get up, go walk around, read a book, have a glass of tea, whatever you need to do. So I think it's a very good, useful guide. I'm providing this like very rough summary here, but if anyone is suffering from insomnia, I thought that book was the best that I read on this subject during the month.
Well, hopefully that's helpful for someone.
Yeah.
Now I wanted to talk about one of my favorite drinks, coffee. What are the effects of caffeine on our sleep? And particularly overconsumption of coffee?
Yeah, I think caffeine has this weird status in that it is by far the drug that most of us are addicted to and is totally socially acceptable to consume. And I'm saying this as someone who, like, before I had this episode, I had a coffee because I wanted it, right?
I regret having 2 coffees this morning. I thought it was going to be so relaxing doing this interview and we're just going to be talking. But
and now you're all tense for the sleep interview.
I am so tense. Yeah. I know. We're talking about sleeping and relaxing and how to sleep. And here I am and my heart is just beating. And I know why. Yeah. It's because I had 2 coffees this morning. I had one at home and then I decided to have another one from the coffee shop downstairs. So what was I thinking?
So this is some good points about caffeine. So one of the first points about caffeine is that the individual ability to metabolize caffeine, meaning like how quickly it gets removed from your system, is based on your biology, and it varies wildly between individuals. So some people are really sensitive to caffeine and some people are not. So there are people who can have like a grande Americano at 6 p.m. and they're like fine going to sleep at night. And then there's other people who have like 1 coffee in the morning and they're still feeling like jittery later on. And so that's one thing I think that makes it hard to make these universal prescriptions, because if you're a sensitive person, you just experience caffeine totally differently than someone who's not as sensitive. The other thing is that like caffeine probably fits most of the definitions of an addiction, that you have withdrawal symptoms. When you get rid of it, it is habit forming. Like when you think about how much caffeine is in many of our favorite products, it's pretty clear what it's doing there is not just to make you a little bit peppier and more alert, but it is to make the product itself more addicting. This was the real kind of sinister quality of it that I thought was very interesting. Murray Carpenter has a book that I read this month called Caffeinated, and he really looks at this kind of caffeine industrial complex and about how, because historically caffeine has been in chocolate, in tea, in coffee, in these sort of widely consumed, socially acceptable beverages, that we don't scrutinize it the way that we would if this was just some new chemical that we invented and started adding to foods. Like there's no way it would be approved by the FDA to just be like putting it in children's drinks the way that we do literally with caffeine. Like there's examples of, I didn't know this because it's not legal in Canada, but in the States, there's a lot of juice that has caffeine in it now.
You're kidding me.
I know, I just could not believe it. But there was an example of a child who they didn't realize that it was some orange juice drink beverage that the child drank like a whole bunch of it. And this is, this 3-year-old is just racing on caffeine and they had to take it to the hospital. Sleeping? Yeah. So I think, on the one hand, to be fair, caffeine, if you look at it like it's a profile as a kind of drug, it is kind of a wonder drug. It increases performance in all these sort of wonderful ways. Basically, all athletes now take a lot of caffeine before they do their events because, for a while it was sort of, if you had too much caffeine, that would like run afoul of some of these like drug testing rules, but they just sort of accepted that it was impossible to regulate. So now everyone uses caffeine because it improves athletic performance. It improves cognitive performance. It's probably one of the few genuine nootropics, or like a drug that has like sort of a demonstrated benefit for cognition. And so it has a lot of wonderful properties, but I think some of the major disadvantages or sort of worrying properties, number one being that caffeine keeps you awake, and it can suppress the normal urge for sleep. And it suppresses the urge for sleep in a way that mimics how the body feels when you have gotten sleep without doing the work of sleep. So it can restore certain mental functions. So vigilance is sort of one of the most clear examples. So vigilance is the ability to like pay attention to a task. So like if you think about like what a lifeguard does, where they like scan the pool for kids that are drowning, this is a vigilance task. You just have to be like kind of waiting for something to happen and act on it as soon as it does. And this is one of the things that deteriorates first when you have sleep deprivation. So if you think about driving a car and why it's really bad to drive a car when you're sleepy, is because you need to just be aware of like a deer running in front of your car or someone swerving into the lane. And
or even just the light changing, right?
Exactly.
So you can,
And when you are sleep deprived, not only is the reaction time for all of your responses delayed, which can affect whether or not you hit the deer or the person swerving into your lane, but there are even periods of time where your brain goes into like micro sleep if you're sleep deprived enough, where it's essentially as if you just like kind of lose consciousness for like a few seconds. And so there are times where you just totally miss whatever was like blinked on your screen during these psychological tests. And so it's clearly quite dangerous. The sort of equation is that like being awake for 24 hours straight is about the same as being legally drunk. So they're about equivalent in terms of your sort of cognitive abilities with vigilance. And caffeine, if you take it, will undo this. So you will have normal restful vigilance, but it doesn't have all the other benefits of like memory consolidation, your immune system, all these other things. So you can definitely caffeinate yourself to make yourself feel like you're not sleepy, but you're not getting all the benefits of rest. So I think definitely for me, I was in this sort of bad cycle of, because we have small kids at home that would sort of, sometimes they sleep till 6, sometimes they wake up at 4:30, sometimes, like last night, one of them wants to crawl into the bed at 2 a.m. You have these interruptions from normal sleep rhythm. The tendency for me was to like just double down on the caffeine and not realize, because I would just tell myself, oh, caffeine doesn't bother me. I'm one of the people that it doesn't affect my sleep. But what was probably happening was that instead of going to bed, because I am sleep deprived, at 9:30, I'm going to bed at 10:30 or 11, because I still don't feel that sleepy in the evening.
Because you've had like 5 cups of coffee.
Yeah, and I'm missing maybe an hour and a half of sleep. So that was one of my big takeaways from this month, was that while I'm never going to go no caffeine, or at least not for the moment going to go no caffeine, definitely restricting it to the morning and trying my best to do 1 cup of coffee. I have been, doing pretty well, but like not 100% perfect. So I think it's a shift for me, but a shift in that direction. And I think that's definitely one of the worrying things about caffeine. And the other thing that Murray Carpenter brings up, which is not so much relevant to me because most of my caffeine comes from actual coffee products, but recognizing how much beverage makers and now even just other kinds of food product makers are putting caffeine in products to make them more addictive, which is very sinister. So like we just talked about the juice example, and about how like it's pretty clear if you look at some of the kind of testimony in some of these court cases around these things, that the entire rationale for putting, let's say, caffeine in Mountain Dew, where it's like, it's a synthetic thing they manufacture in a lab and add it in, is not as a flavorant as is often proposed, but because if you drink a sugary beverage that has caffeine, it will be a bit more habit forming than if it was just a sugary beverage. And that's good for the, Coca-Cola and PepsiCos of the world. And so I think there's something a little bit dangerous about just how we've gotten into this position where the acceptability of caffeine outside of like a few traditional beverages is just increasing. And so now, energy drinks can have way more caffeine, and they don't have the same kind of cultural prescriptions that we have for coffee and these kinds of things. And so, Red Bull, Monster, all of these kind of energy drinks now, it can be delivering quite high caffeine doses, and often aimed at, kids and teens and stuff who, because their chronotype, are now waking up too early and they're tired all the time. I mean, there's definitely some worrying consequences of this sort of caffeine overconsumption.
I used to drink coffee, I think I started drinking when I was in university.
Yeah.
And I also really liked these like roasted coffee beans dipped in chocolate. I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
Like you could just buy them by the gram, and I would just be studying
Pill
for
popping,
exams. Yeah, and I would just be eating these. Like, I'm a little bit tired, and I would just put a couple in my mouth, and I would be like, okay, let's keep going.
Well,
but it's not good. It's not good for your sleep.
I mean, there's caffeine in chocolate too. Like that's one of the reasons that chocolate is addicting, is because it has a literal substance in it that makes it addicting. Now, I don't want to be like overly moralizing about this again.
No.
We're not talking.
We both really like coffee.
Yeah,
it's just everything in limitation, right?
Well, what a drug does really matters, right? So just calling it a drug and saying it's addictive, like kind of seems to flatten the landscape. But like it's definitely good that the white powder people consume is caffeine and not cocaine. Like it does make a difference what the thing actually is. But I do think, we live in this world, and we talked about this in the food month, that, if there is some susceptibility people have to something being habit forming or more tempting or more desirable, then kind of like the engine of capitalism will transform products to more fit that taste or that desire. And so I think that's what we see. And it just happens to be, because of its historical associations, caffeine is like quite unregulated compared to most other compounds. And so I think, especially if you have kids, especially if you have maybe teenagers who are likely to go out and buy these things, just keeping an eye on caffeine usage is probably a good idea, because they're not unrelated. The needing caffeine because you're not sleeping well, and you're not sleeping well because you have too much caffeine in your system when you try to go to sleep.
Yeah. And what is the difference between being sleepy and being tired? Because I have an example of this where, like, it's 5 o'clock, I've made dinner, we're eating, like we're feeling pretty tired. Around 6:30 we get the kids to
start ready to get
we're
bed,
getting them ready to sleep. By like 7:30 they're asleep. And during that time we're kind of juggling everything, and we're both like, oh my god, I'm exhausted. But then as soon as they're asleep, there's this energy that comes back around, and we're like, okay, we have energy again to do something else. So you're feeling tired, but it's 7:30. Like you're tired, but you're not sleepy.
Yeah.
So just because we're feeling tired, that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be sleeping. What should we be doing instead? Yeah,
so this idea came again from Jade Wu in her book Hello Sleep. And I thought this was fascinating because for me, tired and sleepy were just synonymous terms. They're just kind of different words for meaning the same thing. And she draws a sharp distinction because one of the problems she talks about is that people who are tired all the time infer, I must not be getting enough sleep, because sleep is what you do to not be tired, and I'm tired all the time, so I must not be sleeping well. But then they're trying to sleep more, they can't, and it becomes this frustrating process, and they develop this kind of insomnia about it. And so what she says is, like, it's better to hold the belief that, like, being tired and being sleepy are two totally different things. Being sleepy means that if you lay down, you would go to sleep. So that is what being sleepy means, is that if it was sort of like, put out a bed in front of you and you lay down right now, you would go to sleep. If you would just lie there anxiously for half an hour and not sleep, you're not actually sleepy. You may be tired, you may not feel like you have energy, but you're not necessarily sleepy. So the sleep is this biological process. Well, I mean, tiredness is kind of like sleepiness has a specific cause. You need sleep. You've built up enough sleep drive that your body needs sleep. Whereas tiredness can have many causes. So you could be tired because you're bored. You could be tired because you're stressed. You could be tired because you're frustrated. You could be tired because you have some kind of low grade illness right now. You could be tired because you're not exercising enough. So I don't think it was so much that, like, here's what to do if you're tired and not sleepy, but it's important to recognize if you're not actually sleepy, if you tried to lie down and you couldn't actually go to sleep, then maybe you need to do something else. Maybe you need to like switch up your activity. Maybe you need to take a break from your work. Maybe you need to go for a walk. Maybe you need to go for a jog. Maybe you need to like
scroll social media, watch Netflix.
Yeah, maybe you do need to do something that is like enjoyable to you, right? Because you're feeling ground down. And I feel like, like obviously love our kids, but any parent knows, when you're dealing with small children and they're fighting and they have demands and this kind of stuff, part of that being tired is just kind of like, I want a little time out for some me time, right? And it's not necessarily that you're literally so exhausted that you're going to fall asleep, but just that, you've been at it for, 14 hours, you want to take a little break. And so I think that's, it's important to recognize that as being a different need than just, I actually need to sleep more. Because if you mix them up, that's one of the things that I think can lead to insomnia, is that maybe you are getting enough sleep, but because you're tired all the time, you're trying to get more. And then that's itself making it harder for you to sleep.
And the reason why I made that joke, which was a joke, obviously, I find that a lot of people these days, just out of habit, whenever they have free time, they tend to just pull up their phones and scroll or watch TV or whatever it is. And I think we need a break, and I think we need more hobbies, and we need to find other things to do that will help us redirect our attention somewhere else. And I really think that will help with the sleep and not feeling so tired, because we look at screens way too much.
Well, I definitely think screen time, especially when you're kind of in that zone where you're sort of starting to get enough sleep drive that you could maybe fall asleep, I think having very stimulating entertainment can often encourage you to stay up a bit later than you would otherwise. And so I think this is related to our, collective sense that we don't get enough sleep in society, is at least partly related to this idea that, well, you could have gone to bed if there had been nothing to do at 10 p.m., but you stay up till midnight because there is 2 hours more of like fun leisure activity, or maybe not even fun stuff. Maybe it's just work emails, right? Like you're just, I've talked to a lot of people that their problem is that they can't get the office off their back, and so they're replying even at midnight. One example someone told me was someone they knew had their Apple Watch so that they could even answer work messages in the shower.
Oh my goodness.
So I mean, these are real things, right? I think it's an example of like where if you have this sort of constant things that raise your overall level of general arousal. So again, if we think about this from a biological point of view, you have this arousal system that keeps you awake, alert, and it is sort of in mutual suppression with this sleep system, which causes you to fall asleep. And this makes sense because, even if you've gotten your 16 hours of awake time and you have the perfect amount of sleep drive to go to sleep, if a leopard is running at you from the outside, or the neighboring tribe is invading with their spears, you definitely want to be awake for that. You don't want to be like, let me catch my 8 hours first and then I'll deal with it. And so we naturally have this system that if something is important, urgent, arousing in this sort of situation, don't go to sleep yet. And this is how, of course, sleep deprivation works, because people who want to torture someone, put them in situations, loud noises, uncomfortable positions, this kind of stuff that force this arousal level to prevent sleep, even when it can be devastating, even when it's extremely necessary. And so the idea here is that if you want to have healthier sleep habits, as we talked about, you can't force sleep. So just saying, okay, I go to bed at 10 p.m. every night. Well, I mean, if you're extremely consistent, maybe that will work. But for some people, maybe one night you actually can't go to sleep until 11, and then just lying in bed trying to sleep for an hour is a very frustrating process. That's not good. But instead, if you have a rule, what we've been talking about in the course called a bedtime curfew, which is basically just a time slightly before you want to actually go to sleep on a regular basis, and then just after which you just don't allow certain activities. So you can still like read a book or like, do like some hobby or maybe some light chores or things like this, but you're not necessarily watching some like violent television show or, scrolling TikTok or, answering work emails or whatever would like keep your general arousal level high.
Stimulating. It's
not even the stimulating. It's just you want to be at a kind of relaxed state so that your body's like, oh yeah, I could go to sleep right now. If you've ever read like kind of just sort of a long novel when you're in bed. And then you get to that point where you're like, oh, I've read the same paragraph for 3 times in a row. Let's go to sleep. Like that's kind of, I think, what you want ideally, as opposed to, you know, either a hard bedtime, like you have to go to sleep at this time, regardless of how you feel, which can be frustrating, or this, you know, I'm going to just keep playing video games until like I actually pass out from exhaustion, which may be, you know, an hour or two later than you need to.
I think a lot of people fall asleep in front of the TV. I think a lot of people do that. One thing I really like doing is reading before bed now. And it's actually become a habit and I can't not do it. Even if it's just a page, I just grab my book, I read a little bit, and then I feel like I fall asleep so much easier.
Yeah, it's a very good habit, Oh,
I love it. I know we were mentioning bad sleep, and I think sometimes that can be related to health problems that are associated with sleep. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you know about sleep apnea?
Yeah, so I mean, all of this should be obviously prefaced with the like very large flashing letters that like Scott is not a doctor, please talk to your doctor kind of advice. But one of the things that came across in my reading, which was very surprising, is that obstructive sleep apnea is extremely common, extremely underdiagnosed, and it has like these large health consequences. So a lot of people don't even realize they have it, but what they experience is that they get enough sleep, they sleep their 8 hours, but they're just like impossibly tired throughout the day, and they often need to take a nap and this kind of thing. And so it's more common with older people, more common with men, more common if you're overweight, more common if you're like a heavy snorer. So even if you have those things, you don't necessarily have obstructive sleep apnea. But essentially what it is that your breathing passage closes momentarily when you fall asleep. So your brain, sensing danger, wakes you up, you breathe, and then you fall back asleep. And so essentially it prevents you from getting into these deep stages of sleep, because sometimes you're waking up, you know, every minute or two in the night and you don't realize it. You're not like aware that this is necessarily happening. All you know is that you slept enough, but you feel not rested at all. And so there are treatments for obstructive sleep apnea, which is there's this kind of pressure mask that you wear that keeps your airway open so that you can breathe normally. And so this is like one of those things where, it's unfortunate, a lot of stuff in life, you've got this problem and there's just sort of not so great treatments for it. Like this is something that actually works and solves the problem, but you have to know that you have this. So if you're someone who you feel like you get enough sleep, but you're always really tired, you're always really sleepy, not just tired like we talked about, and maybe you have some of these other risk factors, definitely talking to your doctor, just bringing this up is probably a good idea, because I think, that was a major thing that surprised me, is just how prevalent this is, how underdiagnosed it is, and how much it makes a difference to not only your quality of life, but ultimately your health outcomes, because it has all these negative cascade effects on various other parts of your health. So definitely, if you think you might have obstructive sleep apnea, talk to your doctor.
Thank you for that.
PSA over, yeah.
So that was kind of my last question I wanted to ask you about sleep, but I know this is getting a little long, so maybe we kind of rapid fire go through the previous month's foundations, fitness being first.
Yeah, fitness is going great. Been running a lot this month, and I've been sort of working up my fitness level. It's been good. It's been, obviously January is when I was doing this month, and it was, cold. And so, obviously we post these a little bit later, but luckily it was not raining very much this month, so I was able to do some of that outdoor exercise, but I've been very happy with the fitness foundation.
Great. Productivity?
Still good. I think productivity always has the challenge that just because you write down the to-do list item, you don't necessarily do it. But I feel like in terms of capturing and also coordinating our lives together, the system has been holding up pretty well.
Just getting better, baby. Money?
So this was one where we finally made the switch to the new spreadsheet system. So we had kind of wanted to wrap up our last year with our old one, so we switched to a new one. So this is also going well. I think documenting, having the budget, very important. Again, like the productivity, doesn't stop you from spending the money, but it does make you very aware of where it's going so you can make those big decisions.
Food?
Good. I think, the sort of holiday season around this time was definitely a little bit of a drawback, but I feel like in terms of just eating healthier in general, it's been maintained. And one of the sort of not like direct goals I had, but an indirect goal was trying to lose a little bit of weight. And so that has continued to be working well for me. So I've been very happy about that.
You look great. What about reading?
Reading is just this, because of this foundations project, like I cannot drop the ball on it. So every single month I'm reading, now about 7 or 8 books. So I think for sleep, I think maybe I did 8 books.
8 books, yeah.
So it's, and a number of those were like, I think a couple of those were sort of like academic books as well. So I think, I had no complaints about that foundation.
And lastly, outreach.
Outreach has been iffy. I feel like I've been doing it, but I have not done this sort of leap over what I wanted to do to the same degree. So I think, I feel like I've made some more conscious strides to like maintain my friendships and maintain outreach, but it's also something that I think just at this phase of my life, I'm a little bit more prioritizing the people that I'm close friends with, or like the people that I'm already friends with that I'm, don't see often enough, rather than meeting new people. But it's still been a very valuable foundation to work on for that month. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I've been really enjoying sitting down here with you every month and giving all these different updates and asking you all these interesting questions. I'm really hoping that all these notes and thoughts that you have are helpful for your viewers.
Hopefully, yeah.
And next month we're going to be
reflecting.
Well, we're gonna be
reflecting.
We're gonna be talking about reflection and journaling, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I am too. So I will see you in 1 month.
Bye.